I used to joke that the Vietnamese language had quietly hidden one of the greatest relationship secrets in plain sight. And I only noticed it after years of watching married friends transform from fearless adventurers into men who suddenly check their phones every few minutes before making the smallest decisions. The thought first occurred to me during a family dinner, when someone casually used the phrase wife and husband, and I caught myself wondering why the order sounded so natural. If popular stereotypes were true, and husbands were always supposed to lead everything, why didn't people instinctively say it the other way around? It was such a small detail that everyone laughed when I brought it up, but once the idea entered my mind, it refused to leave. At the time I was still single, convinced that adulthood meant complete independence. I could leave home at midnight for noodles if I felt hungry, spend half a paycheck on an unnecessary gadget, or decide to drive somewhere on a whim without informing anyone. My apartment was quiet, my calendar belonged entirely to me, and if my phone battery died for 6 hours, there was nobody waiting anxiously for an explanation. Then life changed. Marriage did not happen with fireworks or dramatic speeches. It happened through grocery lists taped to the refrigerator, discussions about laundry detergent, and text messages asking whether I remembered to buy eggs on the way home. The first surprise came only a few weeks after the wedding, when I wandered through a hardware store after work and spotted a compact electric drill on sale. I had wanted one for months, and stood there comparing specifications like an engineer preparing for an important mission. Just as I reached for my wallet, I instinctively opened my messaging app and typed, "The drill is discounted today. Do you think we should get it?" I stared at the screen after pressing send and almost laughed at myself. Nobody had forced me to ask permission. Yet somehow I wanted another opinion before bringing another object into our already crowded home. When I returned carrying only milk and vegetables, my wife smiled and asked, "No drill?" I admitted that I had changed my mind after she reminded me we already owned enough tools to repair almost anything around the apartment. She did not sound controlling or disappointed. She simply pointed toward the storage cabinet and asked me to count how many screwdrivers I already had. The answer embarrassed me, because I found 7. That tiny moment lingered in my thoughts much longer than expected. Several months later, I attended a reunion with old classmates, many of whom were now managers, entrepreneurs, or supervisors overseeing large teams. During dinner, the conversation drifted toward marriage, and one friend who negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts every week quietly admitted that he still sent photos of furniture to his spouse before buying anything for the house. Another confessed that he had once surprised his family with an expensive coffee machine, only to discover they preferred instant coffee and lacked counter space. The room erupted in laughter because every married person had a similar story. One joked that the only truly dangerous sentence in his household was, "Did we really need this?" Watching successful adults laugh at themselves made me realize something unexpected. They were not surrendering authority. They were trying to avoid unnecessary friction in a shared life. A few days later, I stumbled across an article discussing decision fatigue, explaining that researchers had found couples often reduce conflict by establishing invisible routines for everyday choices, rather than renegotiating every purchase from scratch. I had never heard the term before, and it changed the way I interpreted those little messages asking for opinions. What looked like dependence could actually be an efficient shortcut that preserved energy for more meaningful decisions. That discovery fascinated me enough to test it. Instead of assuming I knew best, I started casually asking, "What do you think?" more often. Not because I lacked confidence, but because I became curious about perspectives I might miss. Sometimes the answer saved money. Sometimes it prevented clutter. Occasionally, it exposed assumptions neither of us realized we were making. Once I planned to replace perfectly functional kitchen shelves because I wanted something more modern. My wife quietly suggested measuring the wall first. We did, and discovered the replacement model would block half of a nearby cabinet door. Had I trusted only my enthusiasm, I would have created an expensive problem. My favorite lesson arrived unexpectedly during a road trip with another couple. We got lost after relying on outdated directions, and while the two husbands argued over which highway exit to take, the wives calmly compared landmarks with an offline map they had downloaded earlier. Within minutes, they identified the mistake and redirected us. As we resumed driving, the husband behind the wheel grinned and admitted, apparently steering the car and choosing the destination are different jobs. Everyone laughed, but the remark stuck with me because it described countless situations beyond navigation. You can hold the wheel without possessing the clearest picture of where to go. The years that followed brought ordinary disagreements over budgets, furniture arrangements, holiday plans, and whose turn it was to wash dishes after guests left. None of those conflicts resembled television dramas. They looked more like two tired people standing in pajamas, debating whether leftovers should be frozen tonight or tomorrow morning. Yet hidden inside those mundane conversations was a pattern I had never appreciated while living alone. Many arguments were not actually about the visible topic. They reflected unspoken concerns about security, convenience, fairness, or exhaustion. Once I insisted on buying a discounted appliance before the sale expired, convinced the timing was perfect. My wife hesitated until she finally admitted she was worried about upcoming medical bills for an aging relative and wanted extra savings available just in case. The conversation immediately shifted. We were never disagreeing about the appliance itself. We were operating from different priorities that neither of us had articulated. That experience reminded me of another surprising insight I encountered while reading about communication research. Relationship counselors often encourage couples to identify the hidden concern beneath a recurring argument, because surface disputes frequently mask entirely different needs. I never forgot that, because I had lived through it without recognizing it. Looking back, I can now see why my bachelor years felt deceptively simple. Every decision involved only one internal debate. Marriage transformed many choices into conversations, and conversations inevitably introduced negotiation, compromise, occasional frustration, and unexpected discoveries. There were evenings when I felt stubborn enough to insist on my original plan, until one thoughtful question completely reframed the issue. There were also times when my perspective changed hers. Neither role remained fixed for long. Leadership quietly shifted depending on experience, timing, patience, or whoever happened to notice an overlooked detail first. Perhaps the funniest memory happened during a neighborhood barbecue, when a newly engaged friend asked several married men whether life changed dramatically after the wedding. One confidently replied that he remained the unquestioned head of his household. Before anyone else could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the message, smiled sheepishly, and excused himself to call home, because he had forgotten to pick up yogurt on the way. The entire table burst into laughter, including him. On the drive back that night I realized humor survives because everyone recognizes a fragment of truth inside it. Shared responsibility often disguises itself as harmless teasing. Eventually, I returned to my old linguistic observation and repeated it aloud one evening while washing dishes. Maybe there's a reason people say wife before husband, I joked. My wife shrugged and handed me another plate. Or maybe they just say whatever sounds natural. We both laughed because neither explanation could be proven. Yet I noticed something quietly reassuring in that exchange. We were no longer trying to establish who held more power. We were standing side by side, finishing chores before watching a movie, each carrying part of the evening without keeping score. Years earlier, I would have interpreted constant check-ins as restrictions on freedom. Now they felt more like evidence that another person's plans, expectations, and well-being had become woven into mine. The funniest unsolved challenge, however, appeared one rainy afternoon when my wife emerged from the bedroom wearing a new outfit and asked with complete sincerity, "Do you think I look different? Be honest." I froze with all the confidence of a man who had negotiated contracts fixed plumbing leaks, survived impossible deadlines, and once assembled furniture without reading instructions. In that single moment, none of those victories mattered. I chose my words carefully, complimented the color, admired the fit, and somehow avoided disaster. But afterward I sat alone, smiling at how impossible it was to construct a universally safe answer to certain questions. That realization did not make me feel defeated. If anything, it made the entire journey feel strangely comforting. Life had taught me that strength was not measured by always having the final word, or making every decision alone. Sometimes it appeared in the willingness to pause before buying the drill, to ask another opinion before choosing the highway exit, or to recognize that the person sharing your home might notice what you cannot. And every now and then, when someone casually says, wife and husband, I still catch myself wondering whether generations before us quietly understood something that takes many people years of ordinary mornings and gentle mistakes to discover for themselves.